What is the most disturbing true story someone has ever told you? Story 1. Way back in 5th grade or so, I discovered a fascinating Pokemon-themed chat room through Yahoo. Within this chat room, there were maybe 15 regular users, generally between the ages of 12 and 16, and we had a great time role-playing various anime characters and storylines. Anyway, I got to know a few people from there well enough to chat with them on AIM or by phone, and a few of those friendships lasted a good 4 or 5 years. One of these guys was a little eccentric. He loved creature and monster models and stories, things like Godzilla, Spawn, and so on. He believed in creatures like chupacabras, which I thought was silly, but I didn't really mind. He lived in a rural area in some Midwestern state, which all seemed like farmland to my young West Coast mind. After getting to know him pretty well and having a good 100 hours of phone conversations over the years, he finally revealed this disturbing story. He told me that sometimes he would black out and wake up to discover that he had or was still in the process of harming animals or scaring other kids. He had quite a few cousins and neighbor children who lived nearby, and apparently he had harmed some animals. When he revealed this to me, I felt sick inside. I love animals, and this information chilled me to the core. It was really hard for him to tell me this, and he confided that I was one of the only people he had ever told. Then it got even more unsettling. Someone in his family, or maybe a family friend, decided that he must be affected by something supernatural and that they had to perform a sort of ritual. They did it at night, of course, in a dark room lit by candles, with him tied to the bed because they didn't know how he might react. He was choking up as he described this part. I could hear his voice quivering because he was so emotional and terrified. He described a very eerie process, but the worst part was the end. He said they heard something hit the floor under the bed when the presence left his body, and then something scrabbled across the floor and out of the room in the darkness, leaving scratch marks in the wooden floor. He was totally and completely serious about this and said it cured him and he didn't hurt anything anymore. I, as any rational person would, decided to step away from that situation completely. Story 2. My grandmother spent her entire life having a recurring nightmare. In this dream, she would be walking down a long, dark hallway, turn to the left, open a door, and see something terrible. She'd always wake up before actually seeing what it was. In her 40s, she, her husband, my dad, and my aunt were on vacation. They booked the hotel at the last minute, so they ended up having to get 2 rooms with 2 twin beds, located on opposite sides of the floor. My dad woke up around 3 a.m. and could immediately tell something felt wrong. He called out in the darkness, "Dad?" No response. He turned on the bedside light. "Dad?" he said again, a little louder. Still no response. Getting worried, he slid out of bed and tried shaking his father. He wouldn't wake up. My dad ran down the hotel hallway to my grandma's room and started banging on the door. My grandma opened the door, concerned, and my dad shouted, "Something's wrong with Dad." He led her down the hallway, a long hallway, to the last door on the left. My grandmother reached the door, turned to the left, and saw her husband in bed. He had passed away from a heart attack. She never had the dream again. Story 3. I have a couple of stories, but this one always stays with me. When I was around 7, my grandmother took care of a baby whose mother struggled with alcohol and other serious issues. This woman would bring her child, let's call him John, to my grandmother's house and leave him there for months at a time. Needless to say, our family became very attached and thought of him as part of the family. One night, his mother came to take him back, and while driving with her intoxicated boyfriend, they were in an accident and the car flipped. John was in a coma for about 3 or 4 days. One night, my older brother woke everyone up, screaming and crying, saying that John was gone. Once my parents calmed him down, he told them that John had come into his room crying, saying he had to leave but was scared and wanted my brother to come with him. While my parents were trying to convince my brother it was just a dream, the phone rang. It was my uncle calling from the hospital to inform us that John had passed away. This happened over 30 years ago, but I still get chills every time I think about it. Story 4. My mom and dad have the same dream when something bad is about to happen. It's not exactly the same, right down to every detail, but the general story of the dream is the same. It's only happened 3 times in the 20 years they've been together. But here's one of the stories. My mom and dad both dreamed that I was going to be hurt or possibly in danger. I was only 3 at the time. In my mom's dream, her mother, deceased at the time, came to her saying that she just wanted to hold me. I've never met my grandma. She passed away due to a drunk driving incident before I was born. She proceeded to tell my mother that she just wanted to meet me and told her, "Don't be mad." In my dad's dream, he just felt like he had lost something very important, and it ruined his life. He felt helpless. They both woke up deeply shaken, but proceeded to go about their day as usual. My dad went to the grocery store, came back, and parked the truck. He had an F-250. My older sister, who was 5 at the time, was strapped into the front seat of the truck and couldn't get out. So she was screaming and crying, just throwing a fit. My dad went and took the groceries into the house. I went outside to the truck. I tried to get in it and I fell beneath the tire. Being only 3, I also threw a fit and just stayed there crying. My sister continued her tantrum and somehow managed to kick the truck into neutral. The truck rolled over my head and stopped on my chest. My dad came out, saw me, panicked. He couldn't find the keys, they were in a grocery bag, and screamed for the neighbors to help. They tried to lift it off me, but it was too heavy, so they had to push it over the rest of my body. I had to be flown to the hospital. In the helicopter, my heart stopped for about a minute. The only damage done was scarring, a broken collarbone, crushed baby teeth that required caps, and later I had braces for 6 years. That was the first dream my parents had like that. The others were when my little sister and brother were born. My little sister's lungs collapsed, and my little brother was very sick. My mom had another dream years later with her mom explaining that she'd held us all now, and everything was going to be okay. Nothing really terrible has happened since. Story 5. I live near a camp that I used to attend as a child. When I was 7, there was a counselor at the camp who was Russian. The camp has a very large staff exchange program with many different countries, and very strange at that. Counselor said he was incredibly fast, and during staff-only campfires, he would catch, skin, and cook live rabbits. He could do this bizarre sleeper hold move. It was essentially a chokehold that knocked you out for a few seconds. You'd come to and be fine a minute later. I saw him do it on a counselor once. The guy was out for about 10 seconds. He was told never to do it again. However, kids got curious and started asking him to do the move. He would do it in secret, but he would increase the severity of his holds, which would in turn keep the kid unconscious for a longer period of time. One day, a camper went missing. He wasn't in his bunk despite going to bed with his cabin that night. They did a camp-wide search, keeping us all on the soccer field for about 2 hours. The counselors started searching the water. They found his body under the sailing dock, completely unconscious. Story 6. My 4-year-old daughter was supposedly asleep when I heard noises coming from her upstairs bedroom. I tried to listen, but I couldn't make out what was being said. I approached the room and she stopped talking. Thinking I had startled her, I went into the room. At the time, she was sharing it with her 3-year-old sister. I walked in and saw the 4-year-old sitting up in bed. I smiled and asked if everything was okay. She said it was, but her sister said they were keeping her up. I asked, "Who?" My 4-year-old said sorry and admitted that she was talking. When I asked who she was talking to, my 3-year-old sat up and said, "The girl in the window. She said you were coming." Trying not to panic, I asked who the girl was, and they both said a girl comes and stands in front of the window at night and talks to them. Not knowing what to say, I said, "Okay," tucked them in, and stayed outside their door for a while. The next day, I asked about the girl. They said she came back but was mad. I waited a few days and asked again. My 4-year-old said the girl in the window was still mad. I forgot about it for about a week until my wife asked, "Who are the girls talking to upstairs?" Freaked out, I ran upstairs and both girls were sitting under the window looking up. They turned and looked at me and asked if I wanted to meet the girl. When they turned around, disappointed, they said the girl had left. It's been about 5 years since then, and I haven't heard about the girl in the window again. Story 7. When I was about 11, some friends and I were having a slumber party, and we all snuck out of the house in the middle of the night and went to a park about half a block away. We had been there for at least an hour or so when I thought I saw a large, shadowy figure about 100 feet away, lurking in the shadows under some trees. We all turned to look and stared in that direction for about 5 minutes trying to figure it out. Just when we were starting to think we were imagining it, the figure started running at us at full speed. We jumped up and ran back to the house as fast as we could and locked the door. We could hear someone moving around the outside of the house, and then it began tapping on the windows. We couldn't wake anyone up because we'd have to admit that we had snuck out. We spent the night huddled together in the middle of the living room, too scared to sleep. Story 8. Up until I was about 6 or 7, I kept having strange dreams. It was kind of like a TV show. I'd watch this woman's life play out in a series of events. I didn't even know who the lady was that I kept seeing in my dreams. Most of it was random stories, like her coming home from work one day to find that her oldest daughter had locked her sister out of the house without clothes. I had dreams of watching this woman discipline her children harshly. I watched this woman and her boyfriend get into drugs. I even saw them use substances before I even knew what that was. I even watched this woman pass away in a hospital bed. None of it made sense to me until I saw her funeral in one dream. The last dream I ever had was the boyfriend harming the oldest daughter. During that entire horrific scene, I could hear the woman's voice crying out, "Tell her I'm sorry. Please, Vanessa, tell her I'm sorry. I should have listened." I woke up terrified, not just from what I had seen, but because the woman called out to me by name. So I finally went to my mom and started talking fast, trying to get it all out. And my mom just stood there with her jaw on the floor as I described my dreams and her childhood memories. When I got to the apology, she started sobbing uncontrollably. I want to note that my mother never told me anything about my grandma or her childhood prior to these dreams. I had never even seen a photo of her. Story 9. My mom, grandparents, aunt, uncles, and several of their neighbors all swear they saw a UFO hover over my grandparents' house in the late 1960s. They said it just hung over the backyard, silently spinning, except for a faint whizzing sound for a minute or two, with all sorts of colors in a ring. My mom and grandma said they remember the television and radio in the living room, turning on full blast, picking up transmissions and broadcasts from other countries in other languages, and the appliances in the kitchen were rattling. My uncle said it was hanging right outside his bedroom window on the top floor, and that he was too scared to move. He just stood by his window, staring. Another time, I'm pretty sure I saw a UFO with my mom behind our house about 10 years ago. Our backyard is basically a mile of farmland, and there was a bright white light bouncing in the middle of the field. Then it just shot up and was gone. Story 10. 10 years ago, about 2 years after my mother had passed away, my dad was getting remarried. Before my stepmom was going to officially move in, we had to clean out a lot of the house because we were consolidating 2 families' worth of belongings. One morning while we were cleaning, my babysitter and I found a fancy mug of my mother's with the emblem of her college and accidentally left it in the upstairs office. My dad came home from work a few hours later, and suddenly the mug was downstairs in the kitchen on top of a sample of the wedding invitations. No one had touched it since the morning. We joked about the haunted mug for a while, saying it was my mom giving her approval of the wedding. Nothing happened again for a bit until a little over a year after they were married. My stepmom had misplaced her car keys and spent half an hour searching every corner of the kitchen for them, which involved many laps around the island counter, which had been thoroughly searched. However, on what must have been the 50th lap around, she saw that her keys had appeared on one of the corners, with the mug next to them. We put it on a high shelf, and it hasn't moved since. Story 11. A friend explained to me why she takes sleeping pills. Apparently, when they lived in Georgia, they bought an older house. They were a wealthy family, and it was a very nice home that had a lot of character. She claimed to find some old purple dinosaur in the crawl space while her dad was fixing some plumbing. She played with the dinosaur for a few weeks and always slept with it in her bed among her other toys. One day she woke up to find it standing on her chest, staring at her in a different molding or position than it had been before. She set it aside. Then for the next 3 weeks, the same thing happened. It didn't matter if she put it on the floor, in a drawer, or anywhere else. One day she locked it up. That night she couldn't sleep. She heard the drawer unlock, open, and then slam shut. She heard slight footsteps and it was back on her chest. She was terrified, so scared. She pretended to sleep while it shifted and sat on her chest and watched her. She told her mom the next day. Her mom didn't believe her until she was allowed to lock the thing in their room. Same thing happened. They eventually moved to another house after other strange things started happening. The dinosaur stayed behind, buried if I remember right, for about 1.5 years. Then one day it appeared at their new house, just standing there on the kitchen counter. They got rid of it for good. I think they burned it and threw it in a river. Never seen again. My friend has recurring nightmares that go away with sleeping pills. She's older now and can't drink alcohol because of the medication. She's made multiple emergency hospital visits due to scratches on her body, which doctors claim are from night terrors. Now, maybe I'm just too into scary stories or unnerved by haunted toys, but the seriousness on her face and the tears in her eyes convince me. Not sure if it's real, but I believe it. Whether I want to or not, truly unsettling. And I had trouble sleeping in her current house. For clarity, she was 13 when the dinosaur thing happened, and she's 10 years older now. Story 12. When my cousin was around 7 years old, his room was in the basement. The basement level was half underground and half above ground. His room had a window and his bed was right next to it. One night, out of the blue, he woke up and opened his eyes, and there was a man crouched right outside the window, just staring at him. He didn't know what to do, so he just froze for a second, then turned over in bed, turning his back to the man, and eventually fell asleep. Why he didn't run screaming to his parents' room is something I'll never understand. This went on for a while. On random nights, the stranger would come and stare at him through the window. Sometimes he would even tap on the glass with his finger. On the opposite wall of the window was a mirror. So one night when my cousin noticed the stranger was there and turned over to avoid looking at him, the stranger shined a flashlight and bounced the beam off the mirror to illuminate my cousin's face, as if to say, "I can still see you." But the worst part was this. One night, the stranger finally got bold and began to push on the window to see if it would open. But luckily, it was locked. To this day, my cousin has no idea who the guy was, what he wanted, or what might have happened if the window had been unlocked that night. And to this day, he still hasn't told his parents about it. Story 13. Hope this doesn't get buried. This happened to my parents about 20 years ago. Both of them were driving out to Death Valley to a hotel for a weekend in the winter. They had left late in the day and were going to arrive at the hotel at night. The hotel was about 30 minutes outside of the actual Death Valley town center. And when they finally found the place, it was completely abandoned. My mom gets spooked easily and didn't want to go and look, but my dad is into that sort of thing and got out of the car. Right after he walked around the back of the building to look around, a man approached my mother's side of the car. He claimed his motorcycle had broken down and that he delivered newspapers to Death Valley. My mom looked around and saw no motorcycle anywhere, and this hotel had nothing near it, not one building in sight. This man was begging my mom to take the newspapers and deliver them to a hotel in town. Otherwise, he'd lose his job. He had the stack in his hands and wanted her to open the door so he could give them to her. My mom started getting really bad vibes from this guy and refused, locked all the doors and told him to go away. He kept pleading. Finally, my dad came back around the corner, and the guy got nervous, quickly handed the newspapers to my dad, and left. They drove off and spotted the guy walking into the desert. When they finally got to the hotel to deliver the papers, they ended up booking a room there. When they handed over the newspapers, the woman at the front desk told them the hotel didn't get any newspaper deliveries. My parents opened up the stack and looked at the front page. It was a newspaper from 1954. Story 14. Paranormal activity is strange to me. I disregard it all from a scientific standpoint, but I grew up in a house where I just can't explain the things that happen. So I just try not to think about it, like how the universe has no edge. But anyway, this house. It was an old house in New Zealand. My family lived there for about 5 years, and there were many eerie things that occurred during that time. We had the usual door slamming when there was no breeze. Many times my sisters and I would hear footsteps from the hallway when there wasn't anyone there. One night, my family was awoken by a loud smash. We all went to where we thought the noise came from and found a vase shattered on the floor in the middle of the bathroom. It had been sitting on the windowsill above the sink and vanity, where if it had simply fallen, it would have smashed into the sink. But somehow it had managed to bypass the sink and shatter about 7 feet away in the middle of the room. My mother often claimed she woke up feeling someone breathing on her face. My biggest scare was when I woke up one night in my room. My bed was in the middle of the room. I could clearly hear a man breathing heavily, as if he were lying on the floor next to my bed. I was 7 years old, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced. I'd had a few asthma attacks before, and tried to tell myself it was just me breathing weirdly. But after holding my breath for a long time, I could still hear the breathing. I couldn't bring myself to look at the floor. But luckily, whatever it was wasn't between me and the door. It took me about 10 minutes to build up the courage to get out of bed and run. screaming and crying, to my parents' bedroom. I slept in my mom's bed that night. Story 15. This actually happened to me, so I'm going to be a little vague for the sake of privacy. I've never been one to worry too much, so I used to give hitchhikers and strangers rides if it looked like they needed help. One day I was in my driveway washing my car before heading to a college class, and I saw a strange-looking guy walking down my street. I don't live in the best neighborhood, and there are some rough areas nearby, so being cautious isn't unreasonable. He was wearing odd clothes. They looked like cheap, poorly cleaned dress clothes. A white button-up shirt, sleeves unbuttoned, black wrinkled slacks, and a scuffed old black briefcase. He had a shaved head and looked very thin, like he hadn't been eating well. When he got close, he asked if I could give him a ride. I got an odd feeling, but I said sure. I asked where he needed to go, and he said something vague and told me he'd give directions. It wasn't far. He asked if we could stop at the local liquor store. I agreed. He bought a beer and some cigarettes and offered me both, but I declined. Then I drove him to his destination. On the way there, he explained that today was his first day out of jail after serving 3 years. I didn't know what to say, so I congratulated him. He thanked me and took a swig of his beer. His destination was a well-known hangout for gang members, right on the edge of one of the roughest neighborhoods around. I pulled in and dropped him off. He thanked me and left. Now, about 5 years later, I saw him again. Same guy, impossible to mistake. He still looked the same, only now he looked healthier, less thin. He was on the witness stand at a murder trial, a murder that happened at the exact place I had dropped him off about 3 weeks later. Chances are good that he stayed there from the time I dropped him off and never left. He testified against the people who committed the murder. They were gang members, part of the same gang he had been involved with before going to jail. He's been living in hiding since the trial. The person who was murdered would have been a member of my family through marriage if it hadn't happened. He was the only person who testified against them. I had chills during the entire trial on the day he testified. Story 16. When I was a kid, we moved into a new house. My earliest memory was that my brother's room was always cold, but I never thought anything of it. When I got older, I moved into that room, but it wasn't cold anymore. I asked my mom why the room used to be so cold, and she told me that when we first moved in, my sister had taken that room and had a lot of nightmares. When she woke up, there were bruises on her legs and stomach. My mom would also have nightmares of a woman telling her to leave the house. She did a ritual or something, and everything stopped, including the room not being cold anymore. A few years later, my sister was getting married. My grandma and 3 female cousins I had never met before came to stay at our place. My mom told me that grandma didn't like staying at our house because she would always get sick when she visited. My 3 cousins stayed in my sister's room, and after the second night, they were really scared and said someone was trying to open their door. They kept seeing the doorknob jiggle, and when they opened it, no one was there. They came to my room and asked if they could sleep in there. I thought they were just trying to scare me, but I played along. I slept on the floor and they took my bunk bed. Suddenly, I heard the washer turn on. The laundry room was next to my room, so I went out and turned it off. When I got back to my room, I heard what sounded like chains dragging across the hallway outside my door. But when I opened it, no one was there. That really freaked me out because in all the years I lived there, nothing had ever happened. I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I went to my sister's room to check things out because I was curious. When I opened the door, I saw 2 things that scared me. There were faint black marks on the ceiling that looked like footprints, and the window was open. What's so scary about that? Someone had installed the second layer of glass in the window incorrectly, so it could only be opened from the outside. We lived on the 2nd floor, and it was impossible to open without a ladder. It freaked me out for a while, and when everyone left, nothing weird happened again. I talked to my mom about it afterward, and she said that the house didn't like new people, and especially didn't like females. That explained why I never saw or experienced anything except for the cold room, and why my grandma always got sick. After that, once in a while when I was sleeping, I would sometimes hear a baby crying. I assumed it was the neighbor's baby and didn't think much of it. But when we moved out, my mom made me go say goodbye to all our neighbors, even if I had never talked to them. When I said goodbye to the family next door, the ones I assumed had the baby, I asked how the baby was doing, and they told me they didn't have a baby. About 7 years after we moved away from that house, I went back to visit. My old room had changed a lot and was bigger. I asked the current owner why it was bigger, and they said that the closet that used to be in my room had a hidden space behind it, making the closet twice the size. I asked them if they found anything in there, and they said no. I don't know if that had anything to do with all the strange things I experienced, but it was just another odd thing I learned about that house years later. Story 17. I live in a party house. Enough bizarre things happen here on a normal day, but you really don't want to be here alone. I'm the only roommate who can tolerate it. But then again, I've seen some truly disturbing things in my time. I was home alone one night, and I was certain of it because all my roommates were in Minneapolis for Pride Week. I had been planning to throw a party, but decided against it. I checked the house and locked everything up for the night. At about midnight, I heard the dog whimpering at my door and got up to let him out. As he was doing his business, I thought I heard a door slam upstairs. At first, I dismissed it as a stray breeze, but it was a calm night. As I let the dog back in, I heard a series of loud slams, and I started to wonder if someone was messing with me. I grabbed a kitchen knife and cautiously headed upstairs. When I got there, all the doors were standing open, which was strange since my roommates usually shut their doors when they were away. I walked down the hallway to check the bathroom door, and just then I heard a loud crash downstairs. A moment later, the dog came streaking by and hid in the bathroom behind me. Now, seriously freaked out, I went back downstairs to investigate. I didn't see anything unusual, so I stood still for a moment. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned just in time to see my bedroom door slam itself shut and then fling itself open again. That was enough for me. I left the house immediately. Story 18. Just after 4 a.m., I was up reading creepy stories over on r/creepy, so later my dreams would be filled with the unsettling art of Junji Ito. Pretty sure I typed up some stuff already, so this might include repeats. But oh well, I was kind of waiting for a little daylight to show before going to bed. One of my favorite thoughts before sleeping, just when it's light enough outside to see that deep blue, is looking at the curtains and seeing the shadow of a human shape standing out there. Anyway, my mom told me when I was little that I used to get up in the middle of the night and keep watch over the hallway. She'd see me sitting at the edge of my bed in the dim light. When she'd ask what I was doing, I'd say, "Sure, I'm waiting for them to come back. You need to be quiet or you'll scare them away." This next one is a secondhand story, but I asked everyone who was there, and they all say it really happened. I'm a logical guy. I can explain away most things, and if I can't, I usually just dismiss them. But there's one story I've heard from 4 different people in my family at different times, and it's always the same. One night on the reservation, way back, must have been a year or 2 before I was born, there was an incident. I pieced it together from different accounts given by people who were in different rooms in the house at the time. It happened at my grandma's house, and everyone had gathered there. I heard there had been something strange going on in the hills, so they all came together. My sister said the adults got nervous and sent all the kids to bed in the same room. There were a bunch of kids lined up sideways in one of the beds. She said that suddenly something started banging on the walls, trying to find a way into the house. She lay in bed with the others, and then the adults started yelling. They were holding the back door shut. 3 men, my dad, my uncle, and one other I can't remember, were leaning against the door. The sound would stop for a bit, then come back. One of the kids noticed a large, shaggy head looking through the window at them. That's when they all ran to the living room. At the back door, the men couldn't keep it tightly shut. Whatever was outside would ram it, and it would open a few inches before they pushed it shut again. Now my dad and uncle were strong. Loggers used to hauling chainsaws all day. Whatever was out there was almost stronger than all 3 of them. Eventually, whatever it was gave up at the back door. Then came the kids' screams. It had moved to the window. The next morning, they finally got the courage to look around. Everywhere that thing had touched was covered in mud. The nearest creek was way down a hill. Mud prints were found on the door, all around the house, and at the window, 7 feet off the ground. Logically, it could have been just someone messing around. But I asked everyone, and they all say it wasn't. Back then, if it were drunks, my dad would have just gone outside with a stick and handled it. So would my uncle, who was protecting his mom's house. What still haunts me is the mud in the big shaggy head. To this day, if there's an open window at night, I can't look outside without chills running down my spine. I used to think they were just teasing me as a kid, but the story never changes. My dad believes in creatures like that. He once said he saw one about 100 yards across a steep valley while cowboying down south. It was watching him. He said it was the creepiest feeling he ever had, and he rushed to get the herd out of there. He once told another story, just once, and I think it's because it wasn't a happy one. His two brothers were riding horses up a mountain and found something, some kind of figurine or small statue, at what looked like an altar in the woods. They took it, and soon after, bad things started happening. Back then, the area where we lived was still very isolated. Roads would be closed for long periods during winter and spring. One of the brothers was working at a sawmill with my dad. While cutting down trees, a tree throned on him when a tree splits up the middle while falling. It crushed his insides. My dad got him back to camp, but the roads were too bad to get to town. He had to watch his brother die slowly. An elder told someone in the family that they had to return what they'd taken. So they did. But still, something must have followed, because the other brother disappeared. My mom told me that part. I never asked Dad about it. He's one of 17 siblings. I don't know how long this post can be, but I'll squeeze in a few more. My dad used to cowboy west of the river, and there are stories from down there too. One time, 4 of them were camping near a group of trees that people avoided. In the middle of the night, with the fire low, 3 of them woke up to hear the 4th screaming. They looked up and saw his body hanging in midair by 1 foot. In that same area, my dad and a buddy told me cows would lay down and then couldn't get back up. The place was shaped like a bowl, a crater maybe. People who camped there would fall asleep and wake up feeling very heavy, like they were being held down. I'm starting to nod off and getting choppy, so I'll end with one more. That same cowboy once told me, if you ever go down there and go wandering around, stay on the cow trails. Sometimes people go down there and don't come back. It's remote grizzly bear territory, so I figured people just got lost. But I asked him what he meant. Well, those cows know not to wander off. There are deep cracks in the ground out there. Animals fall in. People too. That scared me more than anything else. Imagine falling into one of those cracks, stuck deep underground, legs pinned, unable to move. Dying like that would be horrible. I was down there once as a kid, Dad showing us around. I saw the hood of a rusted old truck sticking out of the ground. I thought someone had just put it there. Nope, it was a whole truck buried in the earth. Story 19. The house I grew up in was pretty old and always gave me a strange feeling. A lot of weird things happened while we lived there. For one, my sister, who was about 2 or 3 at the time, would say really strange things. Once, while sitting on the couch watching a movie with my mom, she pointed up to the ceiling and said, "I want to go up there." My mom asked her where she wanted to go, and she said, "Up there, Mom? With those people over there, they're nice to me." No one else saw anything, and we were too creeped out to ask more questions. Another odd thing my sister said was around the same time. While my dad was giving her a bath, she asked, "Do you remember when I used to take care of you and Mommy?" He was shocked and asked what she meant. She continued, "I remember when you two were really little. I took care of you." That was enough to unsettle him. Not only did I personally have an out-of-body experience in that house when I was 7, but we also called the police once because we heard glass breaking and footsteps in the house. There was a lot of noise that night, things tearing and breaking. My family was terrified, and we locked ourselves in the bedroom we all shared. When the police arrived, there was no one in the house. Nothing was broken. Everything looked normal. Every time I drive by that house, I still get the creeps. Story 20. Definitely late to the party, but here goes. I was very young, so I don't remember this at all. My parents told me this story many times. They firmly believe it happened exactly as I'm about to tell it. My parents, my older brother, and I were going apple picking. That year, my parents decided to try a different orchard than the one they'd been going to for years, so off we went. We apparently stopped for gas at this old-fashioned convenience store. While my dad was filling the tank, my mom said she went inside to look for snacks. But she said everything in the store looked old, but fresh, like snacks from another era. So she didn't buy anything but chatted with an elderly clerk behind the counter while paying for gas. We left that store and continued on to have an amazing day picking Granny Smiths and other apples. On the way home, my dad decided to stop for gas at the same convenience store. But things were not as they seemed. The convenience store was boarded up and looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. So my dad drove to a Sunoco station a few miles down the road to fill up instead. Being a talkative guy, he struck up a conversation with an older man working there. Turns out that convenience store had been abandoned for over 50 years. The owner, who perfectly matched the description of the gentleman my mom had spoken with, had been shot and killed during a robbery. I'm 22 now and personally don't believe the story, but my parents absolutely swear by it. They told me they didn't speak a single word the entire drive home. They were that shaken. Story 21. Okay, this might get buried, but here's a legit creepy story involving a jar of hearts. My high school teacher told us a story about his friend who lived in rural Arkansas. This friend met a girl at the Walmart checkout. They chatted and hit it off well. She was a sweet, religious girl, exactly the kind he'd always wanted. They exchanged numbers, talked for hours, went on dates. She always ended phone calls with a prayer like, "We thank our Father." He was completely smitten. One day she invited him to her house at exactly 7:30 on a Saturday night. She told him not to be late. If he was even 1 minute late, she would break up with him. The guy, a Little League baseball coach, had a game that day, but it was supposed to end a few hours before the meeting, so he agreed. On the day of the game, things ran late. 3 kids still hadn't been picked up, so he decided to drive them home himself. After dropping off 2, he realized the 3rd kid's home was too far, so he asked the child to walk the rest of the way. Then he rushed home, showered, and got ready as quickly as possible. He arrived at her house at 7:35, 5 minutes late. A woman in her mid-40s came out and told him that Clarice, the girl he was dating, said he was late and didn't want to see him anymore. Dejected, he went home. The next day he saw the house on the local news. The police were leading 2 women out of the home, the same older woman and the girl he had dated. The headline was about a child abduction case. A police officer visited him soon after. Nervous, he asked if he needed a lawyer. The officer said he wasn't legally required to say anything, but felt a moral obligation to tell him. The women arrested were involved in human sacrifice. Inside the house, authorities found the remains of missing children. The walls were stained with blood, and there were jars labeled with the names of the victims. One jar was empty, with his name on it. Apparently, the ritual had to be done at an exact time, 7:30 sharp. Being 5 minutes late had saved his life. There are some very strange things happening in rural Arkansas. Story 22. I live in a very rural place, so it's not uncommon to have long stretches of road with absolutely no civilization, no lights, no cars, just miles and miles of nothing. One night, my friend was driving back from a bonfire party in the desert when she saw what looked like a man walking along the side of the road. She noticed his movement far ahead of her, and as she got closer, she realized something was off. His arms looked too long, and she described his walk as something she'd never seen a human do. It was like he was constantly staggering, but never falling. As she got close enough to pass him, she said she just knew she didn't want to see his face. She turned her rearview mirror away, drove by as fast as she could, and didn't look back. She called me later, genuinely shaken, and told me what happened. What creeped her out the most was that whatever it was heading in the direction of our town. Story 23. My friend told me this about a month or so after his mom passed away. She died of a heart attack while taking a walk in their back garden. There were no suspicious circumstances or anything unusual. Everything was normal around their house for about a month. Then my friend swears that strange things started happening. The garden where she died just seemed to lose all life. Every plant began to die, even though they were still being watered regularly. And on top of that, strange noises could be heard throughout the house. Things being knocked over and unexplained sounds. One night, he was woken up by one of these noises, so he walked from his room to the kitchen to get a drink of water to clear his head. As he came around the corner, he swears he saw his mother standing at the stove, cooking something, and he said he could smell it. The ghost of his mom, or her apparition, whatever it was, turned around, looked at him, and smiled. He started to back away. He wanted to scream or run, but he couldn't bring himself to move. Then the ghost walked out the back door onto their deck and motioned for him to follow. He did. The ghost walked out into the back garden, to the exact spot where his mother had passed away. He stood and watched her quietly for several minutes. She stood on that very spot for about 10 minutes. The whole time my friend was silent and frozen with fear. Eventually the apparition disappeared. My friend stayed there for a few more minutes just to be sure. Then he went back inside and tried to sleep. The next morning, he assumed it had just been a vivid nightmare. But when he went out to the garden to the same spot where the ghost had stood, he saw something that gave him chills. A small group of about 5 roses were growing on the exact spot. He claimed 1 rose for each member of the family, himself, his sister, his older brother, their father, and even 1 for the dog. At first I didn't believe him, until he sent me a photo. The roses were growing in a perfect cluster surrounded by completely dead plants. I wish I still had the picture, but this happened almost half a year ago. It still gives me chills. I can't even imagine what it must have felt like for him. Story 24. As someone who was raised Southern Baptist, but has since drifted toward a more agnostic view, I've always wondered what really happened that night. In Beaumont, Texas, there's a place called Saratoga or Bragg Road, which has a bit of a paranormal reputation. I've been there a number of times with my family. Sometimes you see something, sometimes you don't. But one night in particular stood out. Our group all piled into one truck. It's Texas. Everyone has a truck. I was about 16. It was me and my stepdad in the truck bed, and my brother, mother, 2 cousins, and aunt in the cab. We decided to go to Bragg Road just because it happened to be one of those rare nights where we were all in town, and none of us had anything the next day. We figured that with so few people out there on a weekday night, we might actually see something. The idea with Saratoga Road is that you slowly drive down this narrow dirt road and then double back if you want another run. On our first pass, we didn't see anything strange, but we did pass a group of young people, college age, who had pulled over into a clearing in the swamp. They were getting out of their car and gave us nasty looks as if we were interrupting something. We decided to double back for a second drive. By the time we passed their site again, it looked completely different. They had set up some kind of pole with a pentagram sign on it and were standing around a campfire talking softly. The glares they gave us this time were even more intense. My stepdad and I were the only ones who really had a clear view of the group being in the bed of the truck. Not 2 minutes later, we started hearing crackling sounds. My stepdad nudged my arm and pointed to the treetops, saying, "Holy shati, look!" There above us were bluish-white orbs of light, about 2 or 3 feet in diameter, fluttering through the treetops. They hovered for a few seconds about 20 feet above us, then suddenly started descending. Panicked like never before, my stepdad and I began pounding on the truck cab window and yelling, "Drive! Drive!" My aunt, who was driving, stopped the truck to ask what was going on, which only made us yell louder. We suddenly took off from 10 miles per hour to 50 miles per hour on this narrow dirt road. The orbs followed us, getting closer, and they were making this eerie noise. I can't even describe it well. It was high-pitched and had a weird, unearthly quality. It just didn't sound normal. When we got to the end of the road, everyone jumped into their respective cars and we regrouped at a gas station a few miles away. We all told the same story. Everyone had seen the orbs. Everyone had heard the noise. We haven't gone back since. Story 25. This is the one about the Japanese businessman who couldn't figure out why things in his house kept getting moved. Little things like items in the fridge being in different places or chairs not being pushed in all the way. The weirdest part? It wasn't happening while he was at work. These things were different when he woke up compared to how he left them before going to sleep. Assuming he was sleepwalking or losing his mind, it got to the point of, I need to see a therapist. He decided to set up a camera in his apartment to figure out what was going on. The first day he came home from work and reviewed the footage. Nothing unusual, he went to bed. The next morning he reviewed the footage again, and that's when things got disturbing. He watched as a woman, wearing dirty clothes, emerged from the closet next to his computer desk. She wandered around the house, ate some food, and drank water from the tap, all while he was asleep in the next room. Then just when he was completely creeped out, the woman walked back into the closet. Moments later, the footage showed him getting out of bed. She was still in the closet when he reviewed the video and discovered her. Story 26. Preface. This isn't my story. I read it in another thread, and it's stuck with me ever since. If anyone knows where to find the original post, I'd love to revisit it. It was from an AskReddit thread about the strangest thing that ever happened to you. A guy talked about growing up in a normal middle American family, loving parents, siblings, pets, the whole thing. One night he had a dream where he was being chased by something, ghost maybe, and in the dream he found his father and jumped into his arms for comfort. As he looked up into his father's face, he saw not the man he loved, but the face of a skinned gorilla, just exposed muscle and bone, grinning down at him. He woke up in a panic. The next morning at breakfast, his dad smiled at him as usual, which helped calm him down. But then came the part that stuck with me most. He wrote, "That was the last time I saw my father as the man I knew and loved. After that, he turned into a monster." The story then described how over the summer, his father's behavior changed completely. He became controlling, abusive, and manipulative. He dominated the family and others, eventually turning their household into a cult-like environment. The original poster talked about the trauma of growing up in that space, and how he eventually managed to escape once he reached adulthood. True or not, it's still one of the most haunting stories I've ever read. Story 27. My friend and I went hiking one evening, right before sunset. We decided to explore a hill nearby, and while we were up there, it started to rain. But this wasn't normal rain. It felt like we were in a hurricane. We decided to head back down since it was getting dark and visibility was dropping fast. As we descended, we thought we heard footsteps behind us. We assumed it was just the storm, but soon we realized we had gone down the wrong side of the hill. By the time we reached the trail again, it was completely dark and eerily quiet. We kept walking toward my car, but something felt off. It felt like we were being watched, or worse, followed. The rain had lightened, so now we could hear twigs snapping. Footsteps, multiple sets of them. We couldn't tell if it was people or animals, maybe mountain lions. We picked up the pace and got out of there quickly. That's when it got really unsettling. Once we were back in the car, drying off and talking about what had just happened, we noticed a man sitting in his car about 20 feet down the road. We hadn't seen him in the car when we passed it earlier, and we hadn't seen anyone approach. From what we could tell, he was just sitting there, staring directly at us. His head wasn't down like he was on his phone or reading. He was just watching. After about 10 minutes of us nervously glancing at our mirrors, his headlights came on. Then another 10 minutes later, he slowly drove off. Story 28. This one is about a strange experience involving a rocking chair and a chilling moment of faith. My uncle is a pastor at a church in Oklahoma, and one of his closest friends is a youth minister in a nearby town. This youth minister has a wife and one young daughter. Every Saturday morning, when the daughter was around 5 or 6, she and her mom would wake up early to cook breakfast together. One morning, the little girl heard the kitchen light come on and pots and pans moving around. She figured her mom had started cooking without her, which upset her, so she got up to join her. But when she got to the kitchen, it was pitch dark. No one was there. All the lights were off. She went to her parents' room and asked, "Mommy, why did you start breakfast without me?" Her mom was confused and assumed the little girl had been making the noise in the kitchen. But the daughter insisted it wasn't her. So her mom woke up the youth minister, worried that someone might have broken in. He grabbed an old aluminum baseball bat and cautiously checked the house. The kitchen looked fine, just a few pots and pans were out. But next to the kitchen was a small reading room with a couch and a rocking chair. When he entered the room, he could barely make out the chair in the dark, but it was rocking rapidly and no one was sitting in it. Startled, he grabbed a Bible from the shelf and shouted, "In the name of Jesus, leave my house." The chair immediately stopped. Nothing like that ever happened again. But even as someone who doesn't believe in the supernatural, I have to admit, that story gives me chills. Story 29. When I was around 18, one of my friends lived in a house about 3 miles outside the village we all grew up in. It was right next to a motorway and had a lot of land attached to it. His parents ran a horse stable in one of the fields. They had gone on holiday and we planned to have a small party at his place with about 20 to 30 people. A few of us met in the village and walked the country roads to his house. It took about 30 minutes. When we arrived, we found 2 police cars parked in the driveway. We figured the party had started early and someone had already called the cops. But it wasn't that. My friend who lived there had been eating dinner while waiting for people to show up when he noticed someone standing at the edge of the garden, just out of reach of the porch light. Thinking it was one of us trying to mess with him, he slipped out the side door, planning to sneak up and surprise the person. But after searching around, he found no one. He went back expecting to find us, but instead saw an unknown man sitting in his kitchen, finishing the dinner he had just been eating. The man looked dirty, disheveled, and basically homeless. My friend panicked, ran a mile to the nearest neighbor, and called the police. When they arrived, they searched the house and the land with dogs, but couldn't find anyone. It seriously freaked him out. Several of us ended up staying at his place until his parents returned. Story 30. My sister teaches third grade at a school where many of the kids come from lower income families. These are some of their stories. One of her students, normally very attentive, started having trouble staying awake in class. Concerned, my sister talked to her during recess, but the girl didn't want to say anything. Later, another teacher who knew the family more personally shared what she'd heard. The student wasn't the type to make up stories. She didn't lie or exaggerate like many kids her age. But one day she told her mother that every night, a young girl with dirty hair and fingernails would come out of her closet and play with her toys. The mother had recently been scolding her for leaving her toys out overnight, but the child insisted she hadn't. The girl from the closet had taken them out again. Every night, the closet door would slowly open and the girl would come out. The student would hide under the covers and listen. That alone was terrifying, but what the father shared was worse. One night, the family came home from a late movie. Everyone went to bed. Not long after, the daughter knocked on her parents' door, shaking and sobbing, and asked to sleep with them. She said when she had gone into her room and turned on the light, the dirty girl was asleep in her bed. Story 31. One summer, a couple of friends and I were hanging out at another friend's house. He was living at his family's old summer cabin, located in a quiet little mountain town with a population of about 30,000, the same town I grew up in. We were outside in the grassy front yard playing badminton one evening when I mentioned how perfect the yard was for games like that. He replied that his mother had actually redone the entire front yard several years ago after a tragic accident occurred there. She had all the tall native pine trees removed after a group of 5 teenagers rolled their Jeep into the yard. It happened in late summer, and the whole family was at the cabin at the time. One girl was tragically killed, almost instantly, when a branch struck her. Another girl had severe lacerations to her torso, and a third teen, a boy, was knocked unconscious. The family rushed to help with everyone's injuries until paramedics arrived. As soon as he told me the story, I realized I knew exactly what accident he was talking about. One of the girls who died was someone I had grown up with. Her name was Erin. We were in the same Girl Scout troop for 3 years, and she lived in my neighborhood. She was only 14 years old. It ended up being one of the most unsettling games of badminton I've ever played. Story 32. It's pretty nice to see a thread like this. I'm pretty sure most of us here can agree that you can't just share these stories with people because they'll likely call nonsense. All right, my turn. When I met my best friend Matt, he was one of those kids who longed for unnecessary amounts of attention. He was a scene kid, spiked his hair, constantly talked about obscure heavy music. So when he started telling me these weird ghost stories, I just assumed he was doing it for attention. I never really believed him, and I'm sure he knew that. Eventually, he stopped sharing them, and I kind of just forgot about it, until recently. About 5 months ago, I spent 2 nights at his place. I had never had any first-hand supernatural experiences until that night. We were going through the usual teenage routine, raiding the kitchen for snacks, grabbing a bunch of drinks, Mountain Dew of course, and heading upstairs for hours of video games. His refrigerator's ice machine wasn't working, but he had a separate one in the laundry room. I went in there to grab some ice, and that's when I heard a noise from the ceiling. It wasn't terrifying, but it was enough to make me stop and say, "What was that?" It sounded like TS, TS, TS. Afterward, I literally checked every part of the room trying to figure out what made the noise. But there was nothing, just empty cabinets, a washing machine, dryer, ice maker, and an empty fish tank. Matt followed me in, and I turned around with a horrified look on my face. He just smiled calmly. I asked, "You heard that too, right?" And he just said, "Yep, let's go." Like it was nothing. Back upstairs, he started unloading a bunch of stories. Before he moved to Florida, where we met, he had lived in an old house in Georgia. As a kid, he used to see a little girl around his house and would talk to her. She never seemed harmful. His mom, Lisa, confirmed this with a story about an RC car Matt had as a kid. One day, while she was making dinner and Matt was sitting at the table, they heard the toy moving upstairs. Lisa went up, turned it off, and came back downstairs. A bit later, it started moving again. She went back up, removed the batteries, and put the toy on a high shelf. Then they heard a loud crash. The toy had fallen from the shelf, even though it would have had to be pushed off. From then on, they believed the little girl was just a playful spirit. He also told me about when he lived in Costa Rica, where the houses have open courtyards. One night, while smoking a cigarette outside, he heard strange noises from the southern part of the courtyard. Suddenly, he heard a whisper directly behind him say something like, "Go sleep now. You'll be fine. Go." He swears it was the same little girl from Georgia. Instead of being terrified, he listened and went to bed. Eventually, he moved back to Florida, only about 30 minutes from where he used to live. During the sleepover, I noticed his bed sheets had strange claw marks. I spent hours trying to figure out what could have caused them, while he told me not to worry about it. But the marks were unusual. Two large rips, like someone made them with two fingers held in a peace sign. We still don't know what caused them. Later that night, I chose to sleep in his brother's empty bed. While lying there, I noticed a small light forming a triangle on the TV screen. It happened again 10 seconds later. Right when I decided it was strange, I got up, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. A Nerf dart rolled out from under the bed and stopped perfectly at my feet. It moved too smoothly and too far to be natural. That's when I left the room and went back to Matt's. When I told him what happened, he casually said, "Yeah, I think it's the same little girl." We talked it through and decided she's more of a guardian angel than a threat. All she's ever done is play with toys and try to protect him. The rips in the sheets? Still a mystery. But Matt is fine. If anyone has similar experiences with a playful spirit, I'd love to hear about it. Talking about it makes Matt feel better. And as his best friend, I just want to help him understand it all. Story 33. A few years ago, I took a summer-long trip where I would stay at people's houses overnight to sleep and such. When my friend and I arrived at one of the houses, we met the husband and wife who had two sons in the military and two young daughters adopted from a tribal country that I can't quite remember. We asked about their daughters and the mother told us that they were very nice children when they were adopted, except when they were taken to church. The girls would start acting crazy, yelling and screaming, completely different from how they normally behaved. Eventually, the girls became Christians, and the behaviors completely stopped. The family believed that the girls had been demon-possessed. That night, I was asleep in the house on the top bunk of a bunk bed with my friend on the bed below me. I had completely forgotten about the story I was told and didn't even remember it until after what happened. I could feel something was wrong in the room. Then my bed started shaking. I was a bit nervous at first, but I figured it was just my friend, so I woke him up. I asked him if he was shaking the bed, and he said no. Then I asked him if he could feel the bed shaking. He said no. I could still feel the bed shaking very clearly, and I honestly was scared. I closed my eyes and tried my best to ignore it, and I eventually ended up falling asleep. I woke up the next morning and told my friend about it, and he said that he felt something really wrong in the room as well. I never actually saw anything, but it is one of the scariest experiences of my life. Story 34. This happened to family members of mine a couple of years ago. My great-grandma passed away, and the house that was hers and my great-grandpa's was given to the family. My cousins moved in with their son after several years had passed. The little boy started playing downstairs and talking to an imaginary friend while down there. He would also look out the door window and exclaim to his parents, "There's the guy." My cousins would look, but no one was there. Then one day their son happened to see a picture of my great-grandpa, whom he never met, and told them, "That's the guy." Soon after, they had a daughter and installed a baby monitor in the room. During the night, they would hear soft talking or singing from a man's voice coming through the monitor. I've been to that house and never had such an experience, but it seems children are more in tune with that sort of thing. I was super young when my great-grandpa died, but I heard he was a great man. I wish I had a chance to talk to him from the other side. Story 35. I have no memory of this, but my very same parents still swear it's true 45 years later. I should start by saying that I'm an identical twin. When I was 3 years old, we lived in Liverpool, England. Though it was 20 years from the end of World War II, the city and countryside were still littered with collapsed and burnt-out buildings. One summer, we vacationed at a kind of camping park by the sea. We stayed in a little camper with small bedrooms at either end and a little communal space in the middle. My twin and I had one end, and my folks had the other. One night, I woke up screaming and obviously terrified. I kept screaming about the lady who was trying to hurt us and described in what my parents say was chilling detail, especially for a kid who had never seen a movie or TV, a woman covered in blood.